I can put it into words, the words of Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who was one-time Prime Minister of France. And he said 3 years ago that he hoped that the United Nations Climate Panel would become a fledgling world government. And you can bet that what he meant by world government would not be any kind of democratic government. This is a bid. The global warming thing is a bid by the political class worldwide, and in particular the left-leaning political class, the bureaucrats, the politicians, the Waxmans, the Markeys, the Obamas, to take over control, absolute control of the way our lives are run. They want to tell us what light bulbs we can have, whether or not we can drive an auto and how far we can drive it, what kind of electricity we can have, whether we have to have a windmill slicing the birds out of the sky, as we now have all over Scotland. They want to be able to micromanage every aspect of our lives with an authoritarian, totalitarian, centralist state. And
oh, my God. I can just imagine what Bertrand Russell or Aldous Huxley would have said about, even though both of them were to the left of center, they were absolutists when it came to freedom of speech. I can't imagine how far we have fallen. Lord Monckton, I understand that after you were banned from speaking, they brought in none other than Newt Gingrich to testify. What in the world did they bring him for? What does he know about global warming? He's not a scientist.
Funnily enough, what he has been doing over the last couple of years is studying it quite closely. I had a long conversation with him when I was last in Washington testifying a month ago. That was before the Democrats realized how dangerous I was to them. And they actually let me testify that time.
You mean you did such a superb job of refuting the lies that you were banned from Congress?
Well, I think that's certainly what it smells like. And certainly the Republicans that I met today, they were all chuckling at the hole that the Democrats had dug for themselves, because this has exploded nationally. Everybody's talking about it. It's on all the blog sites.
Yeah, it's on the blogs. Yes, it's on talk radio like the Savage Nation. You're not going to read it in tomorrow's newspaper, which won't even mention your name. But what did Gingrich say today? Did he make any good points?
Gingrich made one outstandingly good point, among a number of very good points. I mean, it was an excellent piece of testimony. But the main thing that he said, I think, was interesting, was that he wanted me and Gore each to put forward our case to all the schools and universities throughout the United States, so that we would each say what we say the facts are, and then we would allow the schools and universities to research which of the two presentations on each of these different facts was closest to the truth. And as Representative Joe Barton said when this idea was first put to him, I'll tell you who's going to win that one. It's Monckton by a mile.
Lord Monckton, let's deal with the facts for a moment, if we may. The reason the Democrats found Gingrich acceptable is because I'm sorry to say this, he's tainted goods. He's easily pilloried by the left-wing press. He's been roundly marginalized in the press, while you are a new voice. You speak so eloquently and succinctly. You have great credentials, and you would have wiped the floor up with Al Gore. This way the press can say they brought out that old hack who works for the coal industry, Gingrich. That's why they did it. You know that, and I know that. But for the listeners of this show, of whom there are 8 to 10 million every week, I think it's very important that in the next segment, the moment we come back, we hear from the man that Congress banned, Lord Monckton. Let's go through the facts together. How do we know that there is no anthropocentric warming, meaning man-induced global warming? Can we do that together when we return, Mr. Monckton?
Look forward.
Thank you. Back in a moment. Joining us now, because we still have freedom of speech and talk radio, is Lord Christopher Monckton, who says that this concept of anthropomorphic global warming, meaning man-induced global warming, is rubbish. Welcome back, my friend. Can we go down the list for the average person without a scientific background, where you can give them 3 or 4 facts that they can remember in the next time they're confronted with this lie?
Certainly. Why don't we start with whether there is global warming? Isn't that a good place to start? We always talk about global warming. Is there any?
Yes.
Well, yes, there has been. It began 300 years ago, at the end of a period of unusual solar inactivity. The sun had been very cool. There had been no sunspots, and therefore much less solar warmth coming to the planet for about 70 years, from 1645 until 1715. That period was known as the Maunder minimum, after the astronomer who investigated it a couple of centuries later. And it was also known as the grand minimum because during those 70 years, now you need to remember this point, it's quite an important one, the sun was at its least active for 10,000 years.
Oh, my God.
And the Thames in London and the Hudson in New York used to freeze over every winter. They would freeze over right across because it was so cold in the winters. Now, then what happened is the sun began to pick up its activity again, very suddenly, a little flicker in 1700, and then from 1715 onwards it really began to take off its activity again. And its activity went on climbing and climbing. And within the first 35 years of the 18th century, the temperature in central England, which was the first one to be measured by thermometers, rose by 4 degrees Fahrenheit in 35 years. That is a rate of warming 9 times as fast as the rate of warming in the whole of the 20th century. And that was before the Industrial Revolution began, so it can't have been...
Let's slow down. That's fantastic. So between 1715 and 1750, the temperature in England rose 4 degrees centigrade, which is a greater increase in temperature than, what were you saying, please?
I'm saying it's not that rate of increase in temperature over the 35 years, from 1700 to 1735, was 9 times greater than the rate of increase over the whole of the 20th century. So, and that was long before we could have had anything to do with it. The Industrial Revolution hadn't even begun. The CO2 in the atmosphere had not changed, and yet temperature suddenly went up by 4 degrees Fahrenheit in 35 years.
My
it went
God.
up by only just over 1 degree Fahrenheit in the whole of the 20th century.
So the temperature of the atmosphere has gone up only 1 degree in the entire 20th century?
1.3 to be exact, I think.
Oh, my God.
I mean, we're not talking about some huge global warming here, but what we are talking about is a warming that began 300 years ago and has continued ever since at an average rate of kind of 1 degree, 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit per century for 300 years. And then it stopped.
But Lord Monckton, I understand that the sun's activity is again slowing. Is that what's happening while we're in a global cooling phase?
Quite right, because what happened was that in the last 70 years of the 20th century, there was a solar grand maximum. During that period, which centered on the very late 1950s, and about 35 years either side of it, the sun was more active than at almost any time in the last 11,400 years. And that was called the solar grand maximum or grand optimum, when the sun is putting out more heat and keeping us warmer.
And when did that come to an end, this heat?
Sorry, and we got a lot of warming.
Yeah, but I'm saying, when did that come to an end, that activity of the sun?
That activity began to come, it peaked in the 1950s and then very gradually tailed off, but it was still very high and therefore was still adding heat to the global system.
So Al Gore misinterpreted the sun's activity as man's activity?
That's right. I mean, a paper by Scafetta and West, published just last year, says that...
this is too good to be true. Hold on 1 minute. We're going into a break now.
Savage.
Back with Lord Christopher Monckton, and I suggest you take notes. Lord Monckton, welcome back to the Savage Nation.
Well, it's grand to be back, Michael, and what a terrific show. What a good host you are.
Well, I knew you'd like me. Well, look, here's the thing. I'm very passionate about these subjects for a couple of reasons. I have an actual doctorate in science from the University of California at Berkeley going back to 1978. It doesn't make me a world-class scientist because I don't practice science anymore, but I certainly can read the literature. And you know that the literature does not support this hypothesis of global warming. In fact, the actual scientific evidence supports the opposite. Global cooling. And I'd love you to pick up where we left off. You said that from 1645 to 1715, we had global cooling because the sun was at its lowest activity in 10,000 years. And then suddenly around 1700, the sun's activity started again, sunspots, etc., each explosion equal to a multitude of hydrogen bombs. And by the time the